I wanted to set your mind back to 2015. We were seeing the reveal of the Possession wave of sets, a very infamous and popular one at that, and one of the sets in particular was the Temple of Ejitsu, coming with all of the ninja, Wu, our first minifigure appearance of Masako and the Postman, but one of the more interesting ones that we got to see were these two new characters, one by the name of Jesper and the other one by the name of Claire. This was really interesting to actually see, because by this point in time in Ninjago, the most we ever got in terms of minifigures beyond the actual ninja were just simply side characters, like the Elemental Masters or that kind of character alike. So seeing two random characters was certainly something that was very fascinating to see, something that people weren't expecting, and something that definitely caught people's attention. But what's interesting is that to this very day, there are still people who aren't fully aware of the characters that do come in those sets. The main one in particular being Claire, because she's actually the one who's had a fairly interesting history, and she's had a lot more than people realize. So in today's video, I'm going to go over the initial impression and the initial theories that we had about Claire, talk about what we now actually know, and whether or not it was actually a good addition in the long run. So let me not waste any more of your time, and let's talk about Claire, Ninjago's most mysterious minifigure. So like I said, when the Possession wave of sets came out, we just had these random civilian minifigures within the sets. They were just kind of out of nowhere. The most abstract we ever got by this point in time was the likes of Elemental Masters. So to see them pop up definitely had a lot of people curious as to what was actually going to happen next, especially in terms of the show itself. At this point in time, any character within the Ninjago set were most definitely going to actually be in the show itself. People just automatically assumed that they were going to be around. So people were wondering how these characters would be implemented into the show. They had fairly simplistic designs and it wasn't like there was anything major, but it just didn't really matter. People were so much curious as to what role they would actually play. And because of it, a fair few theories came to be. One of the main theories being that she was actually going to be some form of love interest within the show, because in one of the promotional pictures for the set itself, she was being presented flowers from Jay. So people just wondered what kind of implication could be going on here. Hot off of the heels of the love triangle as well, people thought this was going to be something just to really further separate Jay and Nia. And that wasn't just the only theory, but it was definitely the one that a lot of people were kind of running by. So people were very much curious to see where the season was going to go, see how they were implemented, and see what was going to follow through. But the show came and went, season 5 released, and there was no sign whatsoever of these characters, which just left people even more confused. People were now starting to wonder, what were these characters? What was the intention of these characters? What was actually meant to be the case when it did come to them? Because people just didn't really know what was going on. But the more we looked into it and the more we dug through, the more we actually got to discover. It turns out that Claire actually did have a description, reading as such: the polar opposite of her father. She hangs around the temple all the time, not afraid to do some repairs and whatever else her father is frightened to do. In fact, she loves ghost stories, and in secret she spends as much time as she can investigating the haunted temple. She knows every nook and cranny, and has pretty much unraveled all of the mysteries and dark secrets of the temple, but she keeps it to herself because she doesn't want to scare anybody, especially her father. It was because of this people came to the natural conclusion of she was just simply a tourist, meant to just be a face in the crowd, in similar vein to what we actually saw within the show itself, just without actually using her model. And people just kind of wrote it off from there. No one had much more to think about her when it did come down to it, and we kind of just assumed that she was Jesper's daughter, which in retrospect became true, and people just kind of left it. There was nothing much else really to think about when it did come to her. But a few years later, it turns out we did end up getting a lot more to justify her existence. Because in come Way of the Departed, a story that was written by Tommy Andreasen and served as a non-canon but canon bridge between season 7 and season 8. But what was interesting is that we got the reintroduction of Claire, but this time actually having something to do. We had a much bigger expansion on what her character truly was. It turns out that her father was actually the caretaker of the Temple of Ejitsu, but never actually stepped inside and didn't want to because he was afraid afraid of the ghosts, but Claire of course wasn't a stranger to it whatsoever, so she started helping in her own way, staying at the Air-Jitsu temple itself and actually helping out in terms of the maintenance of the building whilst her father did remain outside. She discovered a lot of things in there and even came across the secrets of Yang herself. During this novelization, the ninja aren't actually in the Temple of Air-Jitsu. The main indication of this is just simply put, she is staying in Cole's room and he is not there. She does interact with Zane, he does actually take her up on the elemental dragon to actually get to it, and we actually get to see her interact a few times with Misako. So we just have a simple situation of just a character that was actually just going about their day and helping out where they could in the temple. But you think for the most part that would actually be it for Claire, that is all that would actually be wrote in terms of her appearances within the show. But it turns out there was one last appearance of her, albeit in a background role. In the novelization Who is the Green Ninja, which takes place during the events of Hunted, we actually get to see Claire in the background, actually helping alongside the crowds of the resistance when it does come to the ninja. We get to see her basically just stand amongst the rest, actually doing their best in terms of helping with the taking over of Ninjago once more. It is really cool that she gets to be here, and honestly was a very unexpected one, but a welcomed one nonetheless. But I will say it is unfortunate to state, but that is the official last instance of Claire when it does come to Ninjago. She has not been spotted since, we have not seen any sort of novelization or depiction of her beyond that. She is basically just no longer around. She gets mentioned every once in a while in the character encyclopedias, but that's because every character gets mentioned there. So unfortunately it seems to be that as of 2019, we don't really have much more to do with her when it does come down to Ninjago. Which is unfortunate, because I do think in the grand scheme of things, Claire could have been a very interesting addition to Ninjago. She is essentially a very early rendition of what actually became Alfonso Frohike. You realise that she actually was basically the caretaker of the ninja's home, which is something that they have now explored in Dragon's Rising, which means it could have been cool to actually see her beforehand. Imagine seeing her during the end of the classic era of the show. Between season 6 and season 7, we could have actually had her actually be within the monastery. It would have been a cool addition and a welcome dynamic for the team, but unfortunately it just simply never came to be. Is there space for her to return someday in the future? Not really. If that was her whole intention and that was her purpose in terms of a character, then unfortunately the role has been taken up like I've said. It's not really a necessity for the monastery or even any other location to receive a new caretaker. The most that they could really do with her is basically have her in a background role, and whilst that would be extremely cool, I doubt it is a character that they'll ever pull on, because at this point in time it has just simply been too long. A lot of staples of background Ninjago characters haven't been around for a long time, so I wouldn't expect her to return of all characters. But regardless, it is definitely a very blatant indication that Claire actually did have a lot more going on for her than we initially did realise. We realised that she basically could have done more within the show, but unfortunately it was only expanded on in the external media. It would have been just a nice thing to have seen, really just expand the world for the most part and give us more, but in the end it never actually happened. But regardless, it's nice to know that we finally have the tale of one of Ninjago's first miscellaneous minifigures. Finally getting a story behind one of the first civilians that we've seen in Ninjago is really nice to see, and hopefully more people now know what her story is and why she did exist in that set. But I would like to know, what is your opinion on the character of Claire? Would you want her to return? Do you own the minifigure? Is there anything about the character that you wish was further expanded on? I would love to know what you think, because she did come across as very mysterious, and to this day I don't think a lot of people actually truly knew who and what she was actually doing in terms of the Temple of Air-Jitsu. But hopefully I've educated some people today. So I would love to know, did you know all this or did you not? But besides all of that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I do hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I love discussing Ninjago with more people, and if you do want to support the channel any further, which you do not have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you see on screen. Each of you, your support truly means the absolute world to me. I really cannot thank you enough for everything that you do. But like I said, that's about it for today, and take care. Okay,